Thinking about the concept of modeling, which we do learn about, being able to model behavior for your client.
Yeah.
And that sounds like it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
So do you think that still applies when, let's say, your client's white?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it could apply if your clients are white.
I think people can still tell when you're trying to not be yourself. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's harder to tell if like it's a different experience.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I've never, I don't think I've ever felt uh disconnection in terms of like my experiences or my approach when working with white clients. I felt a lot of appreciation. Um, but yeah, no, I'm just kind of like thinking and reflecting on that question. Like, what does that look like? Because when I think about authenticity for myself and I think about working with white communities, I think about the times when as like a social worker, I've experienced some indirect microaggressions or some discriminatory comments and how I was not able to be authentic in those moments. I've worked with folks who are like have complex mental health as well. And sometimes that complex mental health can manifest as like racist and derogatory comments towards me, who's kind of like an enemy at any moment kind of thing. And so in those moments, I don't feel like I can be like super authentic. But I think for me, it's just kind of like remembering when folks are struggling, sometimes this is how things manifest. And again, like afterwards, getting support for myself around that. But it's always just been, at least in accessing support for myself when a client is being racist towards me, it's always just been a very interesting experience that doesn't lead too much. It's always sort of been like, this is a mental health issue with this person, and so we have to just accept it. And I think that it's just unfortunate that sometimes that mental health can manifest in that way, in like a offensive and hateful way. It's a reality that I've faced many times, especially when working with folks with complex mental health, that like, you know, when they're in psychosis or when there's something going on, like that's the first thing that might come out of their mouth. And so
We were talking about that NASW article before. I was talking about boundaries and not sharing everything, especially when it's not helpful. That can be part of what being authentic looks like in that moment, right?
yeah, I think that is a very good point because, in my opinion, we can also look at authenticity as preserving your energy, depending on where you're coming from in this work, whether it's from clients or folks accessing services or colleagues or anybody that we have to interact with as we're kind of like navigating career spaces. One can say it's inevitable that, you know, again, depending on where you're coming from, that discrimination, microaggressions, racism, the different things that you can experience as a marginalized person, those are likely to be frequent occurrences. I know for me, they are frequent occurrences. But what being authentic in those moments looks like for me is preserving my energy. So if somebody does say something problematic, you know, even though in my authenticity, it's for me to address because I feel very strongly about things like that being said, sometimes I choose just to be quiet about it. Sometimes I choose to laugh about it, especially if the joke is affecting me. I don't have a lot of energy sometimes to like address every single thing that happens. So sometimes authenticity is learning how to take care of yourself afterwards, hearing something really hurtful, maybe laughing it off, maybe being shocked and freezing in that moment and knowing that's okay. Get support for yourself afterwards, connect with your peers. Protecting your heart is also very authentic and it's needed, you know, in order to get through the field for sure.
I know one thing I think I read in the research too is there is that misconception that if you're vulnerable or authentic, it means that you're sharing what you're thinking and feeling all of the time. But sometimes that can, in situations where that's not helpful, then you're not necessarily trying to make a connection with someone and be vulnerable. It's kind of more about you than it is about you and that
Yes.
person together.
Yes, yes. And that's a very good point and something that I wanted to bring up because one thing that I remember learning in my academic journey is around disclosures about ourselves as workers and when is appropriate to do that and when is inappropriate to do that or when we should pass. And I don't ever think it's appropriate for us to like be vulnerable and disclose parts of ourselves for no reason at all, right? And I know for me, I only do that where it would be in support of the person that I'm supporting, and it would help them feel empowered and it would help them feel motivated and it would help us have a better therapeutic interaction or relationship.